Joining us now, Eli Stokols, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Okay, Eli, both sides we see are claiming some degree of victory. What do you think the message is that's being telegraphed to Democrats and Republicans from this one?
Well, I mean, Sean Spicer can say that Democrats went all in, but Republicans went all in on this, too. They had to spend $5 million in the closing weeks of this race on television ads just to boost Republican turnout enough to prevent Ossoff, a 30-year-old guy very few people had ever heard of before of this in Georgia, to prevent him from winning a seat outright that Tom Price won just a few months ago with 61% of the vote. So if you step back from all the spin, what you realize is that there is a ton of energy on the Democratic side right now. Democrats across the country. He raised $8.3 million, largely from small donations that came from outside of Georgia. And that tells you that there is so much energy right now on the Democratic side with the grassroots people who are still upset about what happened in November with Trump winning, who may regret not doing more last fall. They're active, they're writing checks, and they see Ossoff as really a vessel and a way to send a strong message, a rebuke to President Trump right now. So the enthusiasm gap, which favored Trump last fall, now has clearly shifted to the Democratic side. And, you know, Ossoff has a chance to win this in June. He may not. He may just fall short. Last night may have been his best chance to win, as most of the pundits will probably agree with that statement. But, you know, he's pretty close as it is if turnout doesn't change. And I think what's interesting going forward is that a lot of Republicans, when they stop spinning and trying to spin this as a victory, you know, they may hold on to the seat, but it could also be a sort of canary in the coal mine about what they may have to face, some pretty strong headwinds heading into next November.
And Eli, the reason there's been national attention on this local race is because many see it as a referendum on President Trump. In fact, the president himself played into that narrative by tweeting directly at Ossoff or about him a number of times over the past few days. Some Republicans actually not liking that he was equating or really elevating Ossoff to that degree. Do you feel that Democrats then have, even if Ossoff goes on to lose, have now kind of figured out a winning formula that can galvanize the base, get national attention, and at least look as if there is this anti-Trump wave that is starting to hit Republican districts?
Well, I think if this wave continues, you know, the anti-Trump thing may get them a lot of the way. It may be enough in some districts that are closer in terms of the voter registration than Georgia's 6th is. But they will, you know, this will also come down to candidates and their message. You know, Trump compulsively tweeting about Ossoff. He recognized that this was a referendum on him, too, and that Ossoff winning would be a devastating setback. It would be viewed symbolically by people across the country as a rebuke to Donald Trump, an embarrassment for the Republican Party. So he's well aware of this. And I think, you know, what gives Ossoff a chance over the next 2 months is that the race is going to continue to be a nationalized race, a referendum on this president. And, you know, Karen Handel has to decide how much to campaign with Donald Trump. She tweeted this morning thanking him for his phone call, congratulating her. If he goes down there, she'll probably campaign with him. I don't know that that's going to help her. And, you know, on Ossoff's side, he would be wise to at least heed one of the things that was in one of Trump's tweets about this race being Georgia versus Hollywood. He does not want to fall into that Democratic trap, Ossoff, when it comes to bringing in a bunch of you know, movie stars and liberal celebrities, because that's not going to play in Georgia. But if he sticks to the script as he has so far, he's been pretty disciplined message-wise. I wouldn't write him off just yet in what is going to certainly continue to be a nationalized race.
It's so fascinating to hear you say. And we're also learning this morning that Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who chairs the House Oversight Committee, will not seek re-election next year. Was this a surprise, Eli? And why did he make this decision?
Well, it's interesting that it came today. Right after the Georgia race. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who look at Chaffetz and say this is a guy with designs on running statewide in Utah. Probably not for Senate in 2018 if Senator Hatch runs for re-election, as he says he's going to now, but possibly for governor in 2020. People have already unearthed this morning Jason for Governor website that right now goes to Chaffetz's House re-election page, but is a pretty good indicator that this is a guy who has ambitions beyond being a congressman and who may recognize that it's not going to help his brand in Utah, a state where Donald Trump is not all that popular in a red state, may not help his brand sitting in Congress, chairing the Oversight Committee, appearing to be carrying the water for this administration. May be better for him to kind of step back and go back to Utah, enter the private sector, bide his time, and build up his independent conservative credentials for voters there. And the fact that this announcement, this decision was made perhaps just after the results last night in Georgia tells you that, it's very possible that Chaffetz looked at the election, saw what Republicans may be facing in more competitive districts going into 2018, and that may have been the clincher. We don't know that, but it's reasonable to speculate about that given the timing.
And we should also note that Evan McMullen, who was an independent candidate for president, did best in Utah, where he lives and represents. He has indicated recently, before Chaffetz's announcement, that he was open to challenging him for this seat. How might that have played into this decision, and what might be Evan McMullen's future in Utah or on the national stage?
Well, he could be very interested in this congressional seat. I don't know that Jason Chaffetz was, cowed by the threat of Evan McMullen primarying him. Although, you think back, Chaffetz was one of the first Republicans to go home this year and really face a rowdy oppositional crowd at a town hall. The environment out there is different than what Republicans have seen, and it's before this administration and this Congress have really moved the ball forward on any legislative agenda items. And so you have a very divided country. In Utah, you have a Republican base that's more socially conservative, has never really been all that hot on Donald Trump. And I think Chaffetz recognizes that above everything else, the calculations of running, facing a primary in the seat. I do think that this is probably more about his long-term ambitions statewide in Utah than it is about worrying about 2018. But the fact that 2018 could be trickier than elections and re-elections have been for him in the past is probably part of the decision.
A lot of calculus into that one. We also know that Sean Spicer was asked in the press briefing about what the Trump administration is most proud of in its first 100 days. We know the White House has been struggling to get legislation up and running. What did he say, and what's the sense from the White House?
Well, the reporter asked the question and said, what legislative accomplishments are you most proud of? He asked the question knowing that there are none. Congress hasn't really been able to pass anything significant thus far. The Obamacare repeal effort fell flat. They gave up after just 18 days. They're now talking about going back to it, mainly because the tax reform package hasn't been finalized, is not ready to go. That's not going to happen by August. And I think that what the White House fell back on, Sean Spicer said, well, we've signed a lot of executive orders. He pointed to one on immigration specifically, saying that apprehensions at the border, people attempting to come across illegally, that those numbers are way down, and that is true so far. And I think immigration is one of those places where they can point to results in the first 100 days. If those are results that you like or not depends on which side of the political divide you fall on. But that a Supreme Court nominee who was confirmed, basically with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell doing all of the heavy lifting on that, those are really the top accomplishments right now for this administration. A lot of these executive orders, the Muslim ban fell in the courts. There are others. They haven't really been able to find too much money in the couch to build the border wall that Donald Trump promised his base. That hasn't happened yet. The directive to build the Keystone XL pipeline with American steel, they softened, they walked back from that when they realized that the foreign steel had already been purchased for the project. I mean, you can go on down the list, and the executive orders that they're talking about, a lot of them pretty symbolic. Some of them they've already sort of walked back on. They're not really enforceable. So in terms of action, they're trying to send a message with those, but they don't have a ton to show for their first 100 days. And I think it's interesting that this administration is so obsessed with what is really a superficial media construct, this 100-day benchmark. If Trump didn't buy into it so much, they could say, look, it's early on. We've got more to do. We're going to continue to work on these things. But they're intent on saying we've done so much. Trump has to say that he's had the most successful 100 days of any president ever, and that hyperbole that may have served him well in the business community, in the business world for years and years, it's just not believable coming from a White House in terms of tangibly measuring accomplishments that just aren't there at this point. And even in comparison to the past administration, Obama had signed the stimulus bill by this point. That was a landmark piece of legislation. Trump has a Supreme Court justice to show for his first 100 days, and really, so far, that's about it.
Typically why you see administrations try and measure expectations, under-promise and over-deliver rather than the opposite. It's more difficult to get out of. Eli Stokols with the Wall Street Journal joining us from our Washington bureau. Thanks very much.
Thank you.